So oftentimes, particularly with the younger individuals who are really trying to make it on their own, but their mental health challenges are severe, we'll see a whole lot of what we call unsuccessful work attempts. So multiple minimum wage jobs not lasting more than a few months at a time. And so with those situations, first of all, you should definitely get representation for any younger individual with mental health who's applying because it's going to be a challenge. And you need to be able to argue that those work attempts are what Social Security would consider an unsuccessful work attempt. So that helps with the process if you get those categorized as an unsuccessful work attempt.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I have a very special guest, Katherine Siegfried. And Katherine, I'd love it if you could introduce yourself and share with everyone on my channel what you do and a little bit about yourself.
Of course, I'd love to. So, my name is Katherine Siegfried, and I have been practicing law for a little over 20 years. I started in the nonprofit legal services area and have been representing families with children with disabilities and adults with disabilities since then. And I started my own practice about a little over 12 years ago. And I specialize in helping individuals get through the Social Security disability application and appeals process.
Excellent.
Mhm.
I feel like there's so many parallels to our journey, right? We've both
Yeah.
been practicing for about 20 years, and I've had my firm for about 11 years. So
Oh,
you
perfect.
beat me
Yeah.
by about a year, but it's great. So
Yeah.
and we do work in kind of adjacent fields, right? We
Hmm.
really both serve the disability community, but in slightly different ways. And that's why I wanted to bring you on because I have a
Sure.
lot of clients who are applying for SSI, SSDI, or child disability benefits for their kids. And I have a lot of videos on those, but I'd love to hear from your perspective as you actually help with the appeals process. Can you describe for us, like, what's the difference between SSI, SSDI, and child disability benefits, which used to be called disabled adult child
Yeah.
benefits, right? Same thing.
Exactly.
And how do you know which one you or your child might qualify for?
Sure. Those are great questions. So, just briefly, SSI stands for Supplemental Security Income. SSDI is Social Security Disability Insurance Benefits. And then the what used to be DAC or the childhood benefits, those fall under the SSDI category. That's kind of where that pot of money comes from. And the disability process for all of those are the same. So it's important to understand you're really just looking at a difference of what kind of pot of money is the benefit coming from. So SSI is for those who are extremely low income and have very little resources. So generally you have to have less than about $2,000 worth of resources for the individual who's applying for the SSI benefits. And similarly, if you're applying for a child, so under age 18, who has disability benefits, you're looking at the family having very low income and very little resources in order to qualify for that. SSDI is, as you can tell from the name, it's an insurance program. So it's what we pay into with our FICA taxes. And so, in order to qualify for SSDI benefits, you need to have a work history. You need to have paid into the system, and then you need to have become disabled while you're still insured, which is something that I think a lot of people don't understand. So, that can be a little bit of a tricky issue for some people. So, much like any other insurance program, you're insured while you're paying into it, while you're working and paying your FICA taxes. And then you continue to be insured for about 5 years, roughly, after you end work. So, in order to qualify for SSDI benefits, you need to meet that insurance requirement. But the disability standard is the same for either one. And so you would file a disability application. And then if you are seeking SSI benefits because you think that you may qualify based on your income and resources, and you may not have enough work quarters for the SSDI, you need to also go through a financial eligibility screening, essentially. And then for those adult child benefits, disabled adult child benefits, you need to have become disabled prior to age 22 in order to qualify for those. And those are going to be based on your parents' earnings record, whether or not you qualify for the insurance, essentially.
Great. And
Hmm.
that's the one that I feel like not that many people have heard about, right? So if you're a
Hmm.
parent, you've worked all your life, you're getting like 4,000 a month in Social Security, and you have a kid who became disabled before age 22, or maybe they have a developmental disability, they get right half, right?
Yes.
2,000
Hmm.
of what
Yep.
you're receiving, your full 4,000 at the same time, which is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And
It's
and I
wonderful.
found that Social Security does not tell you
No.
that you can switch over from SSI. Why don't they tell you that, Katherine? What's going on?
Well, it's as I have to tell my clients and ask me, why did Social Security do this? I cannot. I cannot read their minds. Um, but yeah, it's not very well known. You'll even find people at the Social Security local offices who may not be entirely familiar with it. And it can be an amazing resource for a family who's really trying to set up, a disabled adult child for some stability for their future. It's a really, really important tool to use because SSI is wonderful, and we're so grateful that that exists for individuals who are unable to work because of a disability. But it's generally a pretty low amount. It comes with a lot more paperwork burden. So you have to go through the financial eligibility every year. You have to be able to maintain your accounts under a certain amount. And so it's the burdens on maintaining SSI for someone who is severely disabled are much higher than for someone who is able to receive benefits under the SSDI program.
Yeah, a lot of strings attached. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then also with SSDI, then you get Medicare after a couple of years, right?
Yes, that's correct. So you have to have been eligible for the disability benefits for 24 months, and then you get the Medicare, which oftentimes by the time you actually get approved, you're already eligible for it, unfortunately. But yeah, the Medicare benefits are also, a great tool for helping maintain stability for a disabled child. Hmm.
Great. Well, so let's talk about that application process. So you mentioned there's a disability standard. Like,
Hmm.
can you give us some pointers when you're applying? How do you meet that disability standard? What are they looking for at
Yeah,
Social Security?
it's a great question. So the basic standard is you have to have a severe medically determinable impairment. It can be mental, physical, it can be a combination of impairments that would prevent you from being capable of sustaining work at a substantial gainful activity level. So, for Social Security purposes, substantial gainful activity, they look at a gross income amount per month, changes every year, goes up a little bit. Right now, it's around $1,650 a month. So if you are not capable of sustaining work where you would gross that much per month, then and you're expected to be under that disability for at least 12 months, then you meet the Social Security standard. So that's the generic, what that likes. In practice, what they're looking for is they're looking for medical records that are going to show that you've been diagnosed by an appropriate source. So, chiropractor, acupuncturist, they can't diagnose you with something for Social Security purposes. It has to be, the appropriate type of doctor to have diagnosed you. And you have to show that your symptoms and limitations from those symptoms would really prevent you from sustaining work. And that's a really key word in my mind, is that sustaining, because oftentimes people with different types of disabilities, they might be able to do some types of work, and they might be able to, keep at a job for a little while. But if those impairments are going to prevent you from being able to keep a job, that is a disability that may qualify you for Social Security benefits.
Well, let me bring up a
Mhm.
specific example that I run into with a lot of my clients. They have children with mental health challenges,
Mhm.
and those kids can work for a couple months and then they burn
Yes.
out and they can't work. But they're often denied because Social Security
Yes.
says, well, you were able to work before, just tough it up and you can
Yeah.
work again. What do you do when you encounter something like that?
Yeah. So oftentimes, particularly with the younger individuals who are really trying to make it on their own, but their mental health challenges are severe, we'll see a whole lot of what we call unsuccessful work attempts. So multiple minimum wage jobs not lasting more than a few months at a time. And so, with those situations, first of all, you should definitely get representation for any younger individual with mental health who's applying because it's going to be a challenge, and you need to be able to argue that those work attempts are what Social Security would consider an unsuccessful work attempt. So that helps with the process if you get those categorized as an unsuccessful work attempt. And the other thing I would say about working, particularly for those younger individuals who, they want to try. And I think it's great to encourage that. And if you're going to do that, it's best to do it under the support of the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation or another job program that's specifically geared towards individuals with disabilities and document. So if you're a parent and you have 20-year-olds who's out there trying to work like this, document all of the assistance and the support that they're getting, because that is going to be really good evidence. And in fact, I find those attempts to work to, at the end of the day, be good evidence because, this is someone who has tried. And so we can actually see, what happened in a workplace, were there conflicts with coworkers? Was there perpetual tardiness? What kind of things happened in an actual workspace? Because otherwise, you don't have that, right, with a younger individual. And so then you're really relying mostly on school records, which can also be incredibly helpful. So, another important piece is, of course, special education services. So even if I have a client who might be in their early 30s, if they got special education services their whole childhood, I'm getting those records and I'm submitting them because you're going to have some, very helpful psychoeducational reports. You're going to have a lot of helpful evidence in there. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Now, do
Mhm.
you help with the initial application or do you usually come in when there's an appeal or
Yeah.
both?
So we help from contemplating filing through federal court appeals. So we'll do the whole process. So oftentimes, if an adult comes to me and they are pretty competent with using a computer, maybe they just have some physical disabilities, I'll often just advise them about the process and then give them the option of, go ahead and file on your own. And here's some general advice about, things to look out for, and then come back if it's denied. Or, if you really are not going to be able to manage the the stress of having to respond in a very timely fashion to requests from Social Security. If you're not good with using a computer, you want to focus on your medical treatment and you want somebody else to handle this for you, we'll take it on from the application stage.
Excellent.
And
So good to
yeah,
know. That's
and that
great.
can be very helpful because I like to say there's not much you can do as an individual filing an application to get your case approved, because at that stage, they're really just looking at your medical records. But there's a lot you can do that can get your case denied,
Well, so
in terms
tell me some
of,
of those things. Like, what are the most common
Mhm.
reasons that cases get denied?
Yeah. So one thing might be that you aren't following treatment recommendations. And so getting that advice beforehand that, you have very good reasons you're not taking the medications that someone might generally be prescribed, let's say for a migraine disorder. But if those aren't documented in your records, Social Security can deny your case on the basis that you're not following treatment recommendations. You're obviously not severe enough that because you're not getting these other treatments that they would expect you to be getting. So, understanding that you need to have those things documented by your doctors. So, we had a discussion regarding this treatment, and this is why this wouldn't be appropriate for this patient. That might be one. Another one might even just simply be not returning paperwork that's part of the application on time, or forgetting to provide them with the information of certain providers that you've seen because you don't think it might be relevant. And a lot of times it's just that Social Security doesn't find the condition severe enough, or you filled out some paperwork and it makes it look as if you are much more functioning than you really are. Because there's a little bit of a trick, right? They might ask, do you drive? And you say, yes, you have a driver's license, you know how to drive. But if you only drive places that are within 10 minutes because you're afraid you might start getting a migraine because you can't manage the stress of going on the highway, you never drive on the highway. All of those details can be very helpful to your case. But if you don't know to put those in there, then all Social Security is going to see is that, yes, I can do this. And that
And then
can
they
really,
have to with the full on driving, driving across the country, doing all the driving. Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Hmm.
I always tell clients, if you say yes, but this is my limitation, they're going to stop at that. Yes, yes, you can do that. So you need to really know that what you have to put down on those forms are your limitations, and nothing else.
Oh my goodness. I'm learning so much from this. This is
Yeah.
awesome. And I know as parents of kids with special needs,
Hmm.
we always want to present our kids in kind of the most favorable way,
Yes.
right? So I
Mhm.
feel like it must be hard for parents to kind of wrap their mind around like, how do I
Yeah.
show my kid in almost the worst light, right?
Yes. I mean, and that's not just for parents either, but for us as human beings, our natural inclination is always to put our best face forward. And so that's a lot of what I do in my client counseling when we're looking at, how are we best able to present your story to Social Security, particularly once we're at the stage where we're going in front of a judge. And it's a lot of talking through the difficulty of really being vulnerable and talking about the things that are really hard to talk about. And I see that a lot also with special education records, is that teachers too, they don't want to just talk about someone's limitations or their disabilities. So we'll often get, reports from a teacher that if we don't talk to them beforehand or we don't make it very clear what it is we're looking for, right? So if I get a parent who comes to me and they've already gotten letters from people, those letters are almost always going to start out talking about how great the person is.
Yeah, they want to be the
Yeah.
compliment sandwich, right? That's what we're taught to
Yes.
do, right?
Yes. And so, in any other context, that's wonderful. That is absolutely what you should be doing. For Social Security disability purposes, it is not what you want. Because, again, Social Security, that person who's taking a look at your case, they're overworked. They have very little time to look at it. They're going to stop at that first paragraph. And so, you want to always assume you've got about 5 minutes of this person's attention to convince them that you aren't capable of working or that your child meets the disability standard for children. And so that's a lot of the sort of counseling and coaching that I have to do, is to explain that this is really unlike anything else. This is not like you would prepare for a job interview. This is really preparing for being as vulnerable and open and honest as you can be about the things that are really tough to talk about.
Yeah. I feel like we're kindred spirits in that, like, I know as a lawyer in this field, I feel like I'm really just one third lawyer and then I'm one third counselor and one third social worker.
Yes.
I often say that and you may
Mhm.
feel the same way, but it really is. It's
Oh,
coaching our
absolutely.
clients for how do you approach the government and how do you make
Mhm.
sure. Last question. If
Yeah.
you get denied, and a lot of people
Mhm.
do, right? What do you do? How do you appeal this thing?
Well, so the first thing I want to say over and over again is appeal. Do not file a new application. There are there are a lot of people who will do that, and there's a lot of bad advice by other advocacy groups or things, who just don't know this process very well that will just be like, well, just file a new application. You do not want to do that. You want to get yourself through the appeal process because for one thing, these days, your chance of winning goes up once you get to like the hearing with an ALJ, an administrative law judge. So right now, the latest statistics on applications, it's about 35% that are approved, which is
So low.
extraordinarily low. And then you have to go through a kind of what we like to call a waiting period, which is the first level of appeal, which is a request for reconsideration. And the rate of approval there is about 15%. And it can take, we have some offices that are taking well over a year
Just to do
to
that part.
do that part. Yeah. So my advice is as soon as you believe that you aren't going to be able to return to work, or as soon as your child is not going to be able to sustain work, file that application. Don't wait for anything because the process is going to be very, very lengthy.
So, and what is the percentage that gets approved for appeals?
Right. So then after that request for reconsideration, that first level of appeal, then you get to request a hearing, a disability hearing in front of a Social Security judge. And there it's going to depend on where you are. So what hearing office you're at and what judge you get. But it's generally about 50%.
That's
So much
better.
higher than the last two. And this is the first time where you got a lawyer. They're going to be looking over the whole case. They're going to actually be hearing from you in person. It's the first time in the entire process that, the claimant is actually getting to testify, to talk to the decision maker and tell them, in their own words, how their conditions affect them. And that's where you really need representation.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
Wow, I feel like I've just drunk from a fire hose of information. That is
Yeah, there's a
so
lot to
helpful.
say about Social Security benefits.
Yeah, I bet we could go on for hours,
Mhm.
but I think we're gonna close it up there. But this
Mhm.
is one reason this is so helpful is usually when clients come in to see us, they already are receiving their public benefits. And if they're
Uh-huh.
not, I'm like, well, we don't really do that process, but now we
Yeah.
know who does. And
Yeah.
you can kind of take the baton and then once they, qualify,
Yeah.
then we know that the type of planning that we do will work. And so
Mhm.
it really is like a great 1-2 punch, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on. It was such a pleasure to talk to you, and I love getting to educate people about these benefits.
Wonderful. And we'll have your information at the bottom of the screen so people know
Great.
how to reach out to you.
Wonderful.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.
Yeah. Take care.
If this video is helpful for you, share it to someone else who might benefit from it.